The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I am your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And joining me for this episode, co-host Will Miles. You can find him on Twitter at Will Miles SEC and his site readandreaction.com. And Will, it was good seeing you last Thursday when you come in. And Saturday, we just got to hang out, eat some lunch on Thursday, and then on Saturday, be fans and tailgate with the best of them on Saturday. It was fun getting to hang out with you in a different light.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's rare that I actually feel like a fan anymore because usually I'm trying to think through things in terms of analysis and stuff like that. But once you're hanging out with your family or you're hanging out with your friends and you're having a grand old time, that stuff sort of goes by the wayside. So, unfortunately, the results of the game weren't better, but but certainly. A good time always whenever you go down to Gainesville and, seeing all your friends, seeing all your family, and being able to do that, which is a relatively rare thing for me these days.
Yeah, when you tailgate with the Harmonic Woods, you always win the tailgate.
Well, hey, that was the first time experience for me, and if they'll have me back, I will definitely be back because that was a good time.
Yeah, a lot of fun there. If my voice gets kind of crazy here, I am just back from a concert there, so a little bit of yelling and stuff there, but I'll get through it. I had to rush home. I was hot and nasty and sweaty, so showered up and ready to go for this episode.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that you've made sure that you look presentable for the folks on YouTube, because you do have a strobe light going on with you.
Yeah, the orange shirt's throwing the light off.
Oh man, we'll try not to give anybody a seizure by watching this on YouTube. So,
yeah. I know a lot of people out there listen at a metal show, Wage War. They're from Ocala, so some people out there know who they are. So good time had tonight. My friend Rob come down from Georgia, him and his girlfriend Hannah. So good to hang out with some friends and get away from football for hour or two anyway. So all right, before we dive into a lot of what we have here, quarterback talk, we'll talk about Will's favorite player, Kadarius Toney, too, and what in the world's going on with this Florida defense. But before we do, remember you can find Gators Breakdown on newsforjacks.com/Gators Breakdown. There you'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes as well as articles from the News for Jacks sports team. That's newsforjacks.com/Gators Breakdown. Also, catch Gators Breakdown on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, Spotify. And when using all those services, please share, rate, review the show. Let Gator Nation know what they're getting with Gators Breakdown. And, of course, on social media, follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. So, Will, of course, I didn't expect at Mullen's press conference on Monday no quarterback was named starter between Feleipe Franks and Kyle Trask. And of course, didn't really expect it. The only advantage would be for fan excitement at this point. But I can see Mullen wanting to see how both quarterbacks handled this week. And I know fans are ready to move on from Feleipe Franks. But Dan Mullen definitely made sure to point out that it's not all on Franks for his struggles. Some wonder if this is a ploy or, coach speak by Dan Mullen to preserve Franks mentally, or as you have said, Will, Mullen is pretty stubborn, and that can be a good thing, and that can be a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of knew that coming into the season. That was one of the things, in our over-under, one of the things I took the over on, or I guess my bold prediction was that Franks was going to start every game. And the reason I thought that was because, A, I thought he would improve, but then B, I thought that Mullen would once he made his decision, would decide to stick with that decision throughout the year. And Neil Blackman actually today over at Saturday Down South, he was on the podcast last week, had a really good article that came out today talking about the two quarterbacks and sort of the strategy of using Franks over Trask. And I thought it was a really interesting take to sort of look at, if you look at what you're trying to accomplish this season, that Florida State game is the beacon that you have to be prepared for. And is the 2 weeks before that really enough to get Trask prepared for that Florida State game? And if not, then does Franks give you the best opportunity to win? It's not a perfect solution, obviously, but if he gives you the best shot to win that Florida State game, that's really the one that's most important, and that's the one you got to prepare for, over the next couple of weeks. And obviously, you want to win against South Carolina, you want to win against Idaho, but at the end of the day, you're recruiting against Taggart, you're recruiting against Florida State. You're recruiting against Richt, you're recruiting against Miami. And so that game against Florida State this year and that game against Miami next year are really going to have to take some extra precedent. And so, Mullen is, I mean, the comments he's making, I don't think it's indicative that he's going to make a change. I mean, I think the things he's saying, that he was saying that Franks and Trask graded out very similarly, I don't think that's true.
No, yeah, right.
Every metric that I've looked at indicates it's not. The play where Trask threw the touchdown pass was something where he read the blitz and sort of moved away from it. He threw it a little bit off balance, but still, that was a play that I think was pretty impressive when you looked at it. Just the out route he threw on his first play, where it was on time and on target before the guy broke. Before the guy broke out his route. So, and the throw through to Toney over the middle was actually a really impressitive throw. I wasn't sure he was going to get that over the linebacker, and he did. So,
And how about checkdowns too?
well, that's actually, I think, one of the criticisms is that the checkdowns are really prevalent with Trask. So I don't think he's a perfect solution. I think that's sort of there is no perfect solution, right? I mean, we've got a bunch of puzzle pieces, none of them fit. And so, Emory Jones is probably too young. Franks is not going to be an elite quarterback, and we've sort of been saying that all year. And Trask hasn't been able to beat out Franks up until this point in the year. So, it's one of those things where I know that the fans are saying, "Hey, we just want to see something different," but different is not always good. And so, I do wonder if you go and look back at quarterbacks over the last couple of years who came in a situation like this where the starting quarterback was struggling. How did the backup quarterback do? And Mullen is right in that there are other aspects of the offense that are struggling, and guys that aren't necessarily making plays that could help out a struggling player. I mean, I know the first throw of the second half, it was hard for me to tell, but it looked like it might have been a catchable ball for Van Jefferson. He got his hands on it. I mean, it was hot.
Yeah.
He sailed a little bit, but at the same time, those are the kinds of plays you got to pick up your teammate every once in a while, and so nobody was doing that. And he's right. There were a couple of plays where Frank sailed the ball and he was picking himself up off the ground, and that affects a quarterback's accuracy throughout the game. Now, in no way am I making an excuse for somebody who's got 22 attempts and 84 yards. That's just not going to get the job done.
You better make that clear, Will Miles.
I'm making it very, very clear. But what I am saying is that I'm not sure that, if we're going to believe that Mullen is a quarterback whisperer and then he knows quarterbacks better than anybody, I can't imagine that if Trask was that much better, that he wouldn't have started up until this point, right? I mean, Franks won the job in the spring. He won the job in the fall. He's won the job every week throughout the season. I don't know why we would think that he isn't going to continue to win the job, week after week, unless, sort of what Mullen said at the beginning of the year, which was, hey, unless what I'm seeing in practice doesn't translate into the game, that's when I'll make a change. So if Franks is struggling in practice, or he's been playing well in practice, and then that's not translating into the game the last couple of games, then maybe Mullen makes a change. I think Thomas Goldcamp today tweeted something along the lines of, that he thinks Franks will start but have a shorter leash. I think that's probably what ends up happening, and I'm not sure the people in Gainesville are going to appreciate that very much, but that's who their coach is. I mean, Mullen has proven that he is stubborn. He's proven that he does not change quarterbacks on a regular basis. He's not Steve Spurrier. He's not going to rip people in and out. He's very cognizant of confidence for the quarterbacks. He talked a little bit about Frank starting last year when he wasn't ready, and how that may have impacted him this year as well, and why he's not going to do that to Emory Jones. And, so he's cognizant of that, and I think he's going to be taking that into account as well.
Yeah, Franks 9 of 22 for 84 yards. Trask 10 of 18 for 126 yards. So 19 of 40. Trask did have the one touchdown. 40 attempts. That's a stat line that isn't going to win many games with this Florida team. And we went back to that Kentucky game and how many times they threw the ball in that game. And that's not the stat line that's indicative of a Florida win. And I know the passing attempts were high because of Florida being down, but that's kind of making my point there. It's going to be hard to win with throwing the ball 40 times with these quarterbacks in this offense. This team needs to be built off of the run. 3 to 4 first Missouri drives resulted in punts, and Florida couldn't take advantage of what they could do on offense. We all know the passing plays were there, but it wasn't working. There were 6 throws on the first drive. The first one drew a pass interference. Only one running back run on that first drive. Next drive was 2 passes and 2 runs. Third drive was all all runs and a 3-and-out. The next drive was all passes and a 3-and-out. It really seemed like this Florida offense couldn't just get, no matter what they tried, couldn't get out of the rut there. And it was 7-3 Missouri after the first 4 Florida offensive drives, and then Missouri made it 14-3 after that, and then Florida went on to pass for 16, and then run for a loss of 1, and then incomplete pass. So, well, I know it was a struggle running the ball, Will, and the Missouri defense is a good run-stopping team. I think this shows just what happens when you can't or don't want to run the ball and don't have a quarterback that can take advantage of when the coaches are calling plays that are there. It does put Mullen in a tough situation as the play caller. Do you keep trusting your quarterback, or do you try and protect him in the run game? And even though the passes are there, so the perfect example, of the quarterback holding the offense back and leading to a benching. That's exactly what happened. I think Mullen tried to put all the trust in Feleipe Franks. Wasn't happening. Led to a benching. So Florida's not going to win many games when the quarterback position has 40 throws and P. Ryan only has 10 carries. Scarlett has 6 and Pierce has 4. Those numbers need to be close to be reversed in the final stat line for Florida to win most of their games.
Yeah, I mean, I think Missouri sort of dared them to throw the ball.
Yeah.
And I think, coming in, Missouri had a very good run defense, and that proved to be true. And they had a pretty bad pass defense. And I think looking at the guys flashing open that we saw being there live, that also proved to be true. And Florida wasn't able to take advantage. I do wonder whether Mullen, in some capacity, used that game as a barometer to figure out, could his quarterback actually carry him? Hey, at some point he's going to have to design a game plan around a quarterback who can make a throw. And if he can't do that, he needs to know that, right? So he certainly found that out now. And I would expect them to go back to being much more run heavy against South Carolina. But South Carolina's got some guys who are out this week who are in the defensive secondary. And so, again, I think that's a place where Florida would like to attack.
They're missing their top 4 safeties. South Carolina.
So they've got a mash unit just like Florida does on the backside. So it'll be like 63-60. It'll look like a Big 12 game. But it's a little bit of a misnomer though that Florida couldn't run the ball.
Mm-hmm.
They just didn't get the ball to the right guy to run the ball. So
I was going there next.
Well, so I guess what I wrote in my article and what I think is true is that the offense has become predictable and ineffective over the last couple of weeks. And I don't know why they aren't being as inventive. They struggled against Mississippi State just as bad as they did yesterday or this weekend against Missouri, but they brought out that throw from Kadarius Toney on the trick play that opened up the play to Morrill Stevens for a touchdown. The game against LSU, they brought out the play where they had Lucas Kroll come across the field and throw back to Franks. Now, part of that is your guys aren't executing your normal plays, so how can you have them execute trick plays? But at the same time, Mullen was a lot more aggressive in the first 6 or 7 games of the year and has been a lot less aggressive really ever since the second half of the Georgia game. Mm-hmm. And, I don't know what's driving that, but not having reverses, not having misdirection, not having things where, you get the defenders out of position rather than just relying on beating them one-on-one. Those sorts of things are the things that that really just haven't been there. The only wrinkle I saw in this game was they did line up Toney early in the game in a 2-back set and then handed it off to him and let him go to work. And, he had 3 rushes for 23 yards, but that was it. I mean, he ran a reverse and then he ran out of that formation twice. That was the only offensive wrinkle that I saw that was anything really unique that would get somebody out of position or would get the defense worried about somebody specifically. And, it sort of goes back to last year where the offense was boring. And and I'm okay with the offense sputtering. I just like them to not be boring. And I think Florida fans feel that way as well.
Yeah, Kadarius Toney does need the ball more, and I think most can agree with that. And of course, the ship has sailed for him to be a quarterback.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know that wasn't your point. Yeah, it's just I've seen a lot of people bring it up lately again, but that ship has sailed. But it's it is obvious he's the best player with the ball in his hands, and I've had some conversations on Twitter about him, and I think we would like to see an increased role. If they want to preserve the Emory Jones red shirt, we maybe give him some more snaps at the running quarterback. I think we need to see more Trask or Franks, and then bring Toney in for more of the running quarterback type of plays. The question was asked, how much trust is there in Kadarius Toney by, Tony Agolini out there, and we were having a conversation there and with him, and it says, well, looking at the season stats so far, in 8 games for Toney, he's got 14 rushing attempts for 148 yards for an average of 10.6 yards per rush, 14 receptions for 152 yards for a 10.9 yard average. So, surprisingly, by comparison, Tyree Cleveland also has 14 receptions, but 10 yards less with 142. So he is averaging Kadarius Toney's averaging a first down every time he touches the ball. And let's not forget, we talk about trust here. He was trusted with one of the biggest plays of the year so far when he threw the touchdown pass to versus Mississippi State to Morrow Stevens. So, surprisingly, that was the only touchdown Kadarius Toney has accounted for all season. Doesn't have a reception touchdown, doesn't have a rushing touchdown. So, we've heard so much about this get it to list and getting your playmakers the ball. Well, here's an offense that's struggling right now. And Will, I agree with you, at times. And I think the coaches outthink themselves. Trust may not be there, but you know what? He is the guy who, when he touches the ball, good things happen. And with the production he is bringing and the struggles that we're seeing, he needs the ball.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can, everybody can say, hey, he needs to touch the ball 10 times. And I think that can be true. The thing I think was interesting, and really being in the game, being at the game, you saw it it was very, very stark to me. He just wasn't on the field a lot.
Yeah.
Like, he would jog off the field after every kickoff return, just sails through the end zone. So they run out to the 25. And then, he'd come in for a package or two every 3 or 4 drives. And so he was on the field probably less than 25% of the time. But, so I kind of relate it to basketball in that Steph Curry is great, not only because he can hit threes that no one else can hit, it's because he stretches the floor and opens up things for other people because the defense has to worry about Curry. And I think the same thing happens in football when you have an explosive play. I think that's what happened last year to Florida in many ways when they lost Antonio Callaway. It wasn't just the production that they lost from Callaway. It was the gravity that he has, that you have to put 2 guys on Callaway, which means the guy on the other side of the field has to be in one-on-one because you've committed that second guy over there. And so why he's not on the field is really what flummoxes me. Now, maybe it's his blocking. Maybe he's not a good enough blocking wide receiver, but it still feels like you could put him out there on the edge where all he has to do is kind of pretend to block the corner, and then you run the play in the other direction. And they shade a safety over in that direction because they're worried about a little bubble screen. Just to not have your most dynamic player on the field for the majority of the snaps is confusing to me. I mean, he averaged 19 yards a touch. He had 2 receptions for 72 yards. He had 3 rushes for 23. Again, every time he touched it, something happened. He had explosive plays. 2 of the 3 that Florida had, 2 of the 3 20-plus yard plays. One was a 27-yard pass that set up a touchdown. One was a 45-yard pass that they wound up turning the ball over on downs, but it was down deep in the red zone at the end of the game. So, he is the offense right now, and to only have him out on the field, that to me is the bigger thing. Mm-hmm. Like, you can decide, that a defense can take somebody away. A defense can prevent you from targeting someone based on the coverages that they bring out or the different things that they do from a scheme. But at the end of the day, like, you can still have him out there, still have him attracting the defense, and then using that to open up other things on the other side of the field.
All right, so Will, with all the offense talk, of course, our good friend and colleague Bill Sykes posted the poll pretty much before anybody else could. I was going to post it, but good for Bill getting out in front of it too. And he asked the question: which Gator quarterback should get the start versus South Carolina? And with the final poll results with over 5,000 votes, 64% want to see Kyle Trask get the start this week versus South Carolina. 22% voted for Emory Jones, and only 14% for Feleipe Franks. And Will, I think you did make your prediction that you think, right now I don't want to speak for you, but you do think Feleipe Franks rolls out there to be the starting quarterback versus South Carolina.
I think Franks will be the starter. That doesn't mean I think he should be,
no,
but I think he will. I think there's some sense in doing it. Again, I think Neil Blackman sort of laid out a really good case for that. I think wasting the red shirt for Emory Jones at this point is really not advantageous long term. I think it's really a matter of maximizing his reps at Florida. If you want to start Emory Jones, start him against start him against Idaho and start him in the bowl game,
Yeah.
or start him against Florida State and start him in the bowl game. I mean, at some point, if you want to make him the starter, that's fine. Get him the reps you want to get him, but do it in a way where he's playing consecutive games, not where you're putting him in for 3 plays in one game, 3 plays in another, and certainly not if that wastes his red shirt. I think everybody wants to see what Trask has.
Mm-hmm.
I think the
One
the
thing I
thought,
don't one thing I don't like, Will, this whole thought of he's a gamer. We don't know that. Come
well,
on.
he hasn't played in a game.
Right,
Like,
exactly. There's this big thought out there that maybe he's this gamer. I mean, maybe he is, but that talk being out there as prevalent as it is kind of makes me wonder. I don't know.
well, again, I said it earlier, and this is what I believe is that there are mismatched puzzle pieces right now at the quarterback position that everybody's limited. Franks is limited. Trask is likely limited. We saw that a little bit when Missouri brought some real pressure, and then Jones is limited just because he's younger, and he may be limited as well in terms of his skill set. We really have no idea. So when you have limited options at that space, I don't know that there's a right answer. I know that it's going to be rough if Frank struggles and he starts, but I also know it's going to be rough if Trask were to struggle and they had to bring Franks in. I mean, it's just there's not really a good solution here. I think if you're Mullen, you have to take a look at practice. You have to take a look at the season as a whole. You have to take a look at this week's practice, and you have to say, okay, who is the guy who gives us the best chance to win, and put him out there. Because you do that with the running backs, you do that with the tight ends, you do that with the offensive line, right? You grade out those guys, and you'd say, hey, this is who gives us the best chance to win. And if it doesn't translate, then it doesn't translate. Now, there is something to be said for, and you see this with a lot of coaches where they do tend to they go into risk aversion mode. So some coaches won't go for it on 4th down, even though the math said they should, because they'll get criticized for it. And so I think switching to Trask at this point is an easy decision because no one's going to fault him for doing it after the last 2 games for Franks. I think sticking with Franks is actually the hard choice. And so I'll be kind of impressed if he does it. I don't know whether it's the right choice, but at least you'll say, if nothing else, you can say that he does what he believes in, and that he's going to do what he thinks is right for his program and what he thinks is right to win the game. I don't have access to practice to know what's going on. So this is one of those where when people say I trust Mullen, I mean, you kind of have to in this case.
Right.
What he practice, he knows, and we saw something from Trask in this game, but again, the defenses were different by the time he came in. I mean, by the time you're down 4 touchdowns, the intensity changes.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to see him start, and I'll go the other way. I think he will, but like I said, it's just a guess. There's no info out there or anything like that. But I think, of course, a lot of it is what happens in practice this week, and I really do believe Mullen when he says whatever happens in practice is what he's gonna take with him on Saturday. So we'll see how that goes. But I do think Trask deserves a shot to see what he has, and I think fans are ready. Fans are definitely ready. Of course, we're going by that poll. Definitely ready to see that happen. But I don't expect him to come out there and light the world on fire. If he was that head and shoulders above Feleipe Franks, he would have been playing already. But I do think he can bring some things to the table that necessarily Franks right now can't. I don't know where Feleipe Franks is at mentally right now. That's something we all can't. We can't measure there, but there are some the thought out there, and I know Nick DeLatorre, who's been with us and all that stuff, and talking to him, he's thought the whole time Kyle Trask has been the better quarterback from what he's been told, what he's heard, and look, there we go. I mean, everybody's been told something different. So I think when you look at it, then it really is just time to see it with our eyes when this team rolls out there and plays on Saturday. And its opponent, it's an SEC opponent. It's a Will Muschamp defense. They're banged up, but it's still a defense that Will Muschamp knows how to draw up. So given whatever happens Saturday, I think we will be able to take a lot away from the performance of Feleipe Franks or Kyle Trask and how everything comes out when these 2 guys are on there. Now, something I do want to see, and whether it is Kadarius Toney or whether it is Emory Jones in some capacity. I wouldn't mind seeing that other second quarterback, that running quarterback, get a little more carries, and I guess make it easier for whatever quarterback is out there, the one who isn't necessarily known as the runner, whether it be Trask or Franks.
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly talked about that a lot over the season in terms of Mullen's offenses and what that means, and how Nick Fitzgerald and Feleipe Franks were kind of equivalent through the air last year. And the reason Mississippi State was able to win is because Fitzgerald put up like 1,000 yards rushing compared to Franks, who was in the negative last year. And that was really the difference between the two of them. Now, the reason that hasn't translated as much this year is because Franks, while he's run a lot better this year than he did last year, and he's made better decisions when he's dropped back, he's just not the guy. He's not Fitzgerald. He's not going to run like that. But Trask isn't that guy either, and so yeah, you're right. They're going to have to bring somebody in to do that. Now, whether it's Emory Jones, whether it's Kadarius Toney, heck, whether it's LaMichael Pirine getting a direct snap back there, they've done that a few times. I just like to see something that's a little bit inventive and a little bit unique, something where Muschamp hasn't schemed for it, and something to take advantage of some of the things that people are doing, right? I mean, if they're daring you to throw, you can do things with that you can leak out a tight end on the backside when you run a pitch to Toney out to the right and have him throw back to a tight end who leaks out. You can do things that are creative but are relatively low risk if you're willing to rep them, and you do it during practice and you say, hey, this is something we're definitely going to run. So, at this point, there's nothing really new that we've seen the last 2 weeks. And I think when you don't see anything new, when you don't keep the defense on its heels, and when your quarterback struggles to throw the ball downfield, you're going to struggle to score. But, this isn't necessarily a new phenomenon. I mean, they scored 16 against Kentucky. They scored 13 against Mississippi State. They scored 27 against LSU, but one of those was on a pick six. They didn't score much at all against Vanderbilt till the second half. 17 against Georgia, 17 against Missouri. In SEC games, they've only scored 24.9 points per game. Under McElwain in the previous 3 years, it was 21, 24.5, and 23.6. And if you remove some of the points that were scored against Tennessee on turnovers and, sort of unforced errors, the offense isn't really much better against quality teams. I mean, last year you take out Charleston Southern and you put in Michigan, and the season doesn't look a whole lot different. Now, Mullen deserves credit for winning some of those close games, and certainly 6-3 is impressive, I think, based on the 4-7 from last year. But, everybody got really excited when they put up 53 against Charleston Southern, 48 against Colorado State, and 47 against Tennessee. That offense just hasn't been here. For the last month and a half. And I don't think you can blame that all on Franks. I think there are systemic things both on the offensive line, at wide receiver, and with some of the schemes that they're doing that are limiting them. And I think we'll probably continue to see that. There are going to be some things Muschamp can take advantage of, and they're going to have to limit turnovers. They're going to have to do some creative things. And quite honestly, the defense got to play a lot better.
Yeah, and that's where we'll go next, Will. But before, just thinking of the things we've just been talking about the last few minutes, it's weird how seasons play out different than when you thought coming in. We thought this team would be rely on Jordan Scarlett, LaMichael Pirine, Malik Davis when he was healthy, and Damian Pierce. And, there's kind of, that running game, they've relied on it at times, but not as much as I think what we thought they would. And also, Emory Jones maybe being that, we keep going back to it in that Tebow style of quarterback where you're not going to get those rushing yards out of Feleipe Franks and or Kyle Trask. It would be another guy who could come in and get those yards. It is funny how seasons play out when when what we do when we come into this season, and it's a whole lot different.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny. I mean, first 7 games of the year, you're sitting there. They're 6-1. They lost to Kentucky, but that was early. The team has continued to grow. That game against Georgia, it was something where you're like, okay, we lost, but Georgia's probably the better team. We're just we're much more productive than we were last year. And then you come out and you just lay an egg against Missouri and go, wow, I was expecting that against Tennessee or against Mississippi State when it was on the road. Yeah. The crazy thing is how poorly they've played at home this year compared to on the road. I mean, on the road,
my mind.
It's just, and I wonder whether that has to do with Franks and just he's been playing better. I wonder whether it's because they feel challenged when they go off on the road. But the loss to Kentucky, they didn't look impressive at all. LSU was impressive because of who they were playing, but the offense wasn't going up and down the field. And then obviously Missouri not impressive at all. So it's been interesting that when they've gone on the road and when they've been challenged, they played really well, which speaks well for the South Carolina game, because I think everybody's going to feel challenged after coming. I can understand how the team would have been a little bit flat against Missouri coming out after that Georgia game. If they come out flat for this one, then the team's got real problems, because there have been a lot of people on Twitter and other places calling them soft.
Yeah, where they have looked soft, Will, lately is on defense. We've spoken to it, and the ton of yards they've given up the last 2 weeks against Georgia and Missouri. And I mentioned it yesterday on the podcast. You mentioned it as well, and you titled it as a paragraph in your article, "Third and Grantham is alive and well." And last week it was a different type of third and Grantham. The traditional third and Grantham has been bring a lot of pressure, and that ends up leaving guys open. Well, against Georgia, they didn't really bring as much pressure as we were used to seeing under Todd Grantham, and the big plays still happened. Georgia went 8 of 14 on third down, and Jake Fromm, a quarterback who had struggled on third and long and third and passing situations, lit up Florida. And then Missouri went 11 of 18 on third down after getting manhandled in the second half last week against Kentucky. They didn't convert a first down at all, and Missouri goes on to go 11 of 18 on third down. So it's not just third down where this defense is struggling, but the explosive plays and third and Grantham is really, really much different than what we were getting used to, about midway through the season.
Yeah, I mean it's been a struggle certainly over the last couple of games. The third down conversions are a problem because it keeps your defense on the field, obviously, and if you can't get off the field, then you got problems. But more than anything, it was that it felt like every third down against Missouri was 3rd and 1.
Mm-hmm.
But it felt like they had 14 different options, that we weren't going to be able to stop them. The first down play felt like a 6-yard run every time they ran it. There really weren't any negative plays. I know Mullen made a point about having 0 sacks. ESPN actually says they have 1, but that's just because Chauncey Gardner-Johnson caught locked behind the line of scrimmage on a read option. So that's not really a sack. They had 4 tackles for loss, 0 quarterback hurries. Now, part of that is a function of Missouri getting the ball out quickly. But, for them not to be anticipating Missouri getting the ball out quickly, for them having safeties playing as deep as they were, and then still getting beat. I mean, there were guys roaming free all over the place in that backfield. I mean, the throw to Alberto, I mean, that was just against air. I mean, that was there wasn't anybody anywhere near him. There was a play where Trey Dean got beat where there wasn't anybody there either. So, I haven't gone back and taken a detailed look at the film, so it might not be those guys' fault, but clearly miscommunications in a couple of different cases that opened up plays for Missouri. And, Florida had gotten to a point where they might be able to attack in the second half, had an immediate 3 and out, and then Missouri came down the field, punched it in, game was over. So, they gave up 6.4 yards per play. That's not good, especially when you average 4.8 on your own. But what they did do is they gave up 8 explosive plays, so 8 20-plus yard plays for 228 yards. And last week against Georgia, they gave up another 8 explosive plays for 210 yards. And so the defense is playing okay for the plays where they're not giving up those gash plays. But, when you give up 8 gash plays, every time you give up one of those, it basically leads to points. So, a 27-yard run for Roundtree, a 31-yard run for Roundtree, a 22-yard pass to Alberto, but it was only 22 yards because he stopped for the touchdown. 24-yard run for Crockett, 41-yard pass to Hall, 41-yard pass to Scott, 21-yard pass to Johnson, 21-yard pass to Hall. It was just every drive they were hitting a big play. And the same thing in the second half against Georgia last week. And, Florida was in that game against Georgia because the defense was keeping them in it. And then in the second half, they just collapsed. So, I'm not sure whether it has something to do with the young secondary. I don't know whether it has to do with the injuries. Obviously, last week, CJ Henderson went out. That wasn't an issue this week, but, you're still thin and you still got young guys out there. And I'm sure that there were things on tape that Missouri saw and said, hey, we can take advantage of. And they did.
Yeah, well, I think it's what gets me is just the invisibility of the things that they were doing so well. They're not getting to the quarterback. They're not sacking the quarterback. Third down defense was actually good for a stretch, especially against Missouri and LSU or Mississippi State and LSU, those 2 back-to-back games, and you dominated on third down in those games. You were creating turnovers, and I know that kind of goes hand in hand with the pressure that this was getting. But Ja'Kai Polite, Jabari Zuniga not getting to the quarterback. CeCe Jefferson's been pretty much invisible all season. After coming back from the suspension, it's kind of been a disappointing season, senior season for him right now. And then it's just, I think that's what gets me the most is seeing where this defense was at for just a stretch around midseason, and then seeing almost everything they were doing so well not really showing up anymore.
Yeah, it's one of the things I'm hoping to have time to take a look at this week. I suspect that the lack of inventiveness that I saw on offense is also rearing its head on defense as well. And part of that is when you've got a limited quarterback, you can't do a whole lot of different things. You can't run the entire playbook when you've got somebody who's struggling with the basics. And I think the same thing maybe applies to the defense as well, is that, to start the season, they have this package. Nobody really knows what they're going to get from Grantham. And all of a sudden they're freeing up guys like Polite and Joseph on blitzes and getting to the quarterback and really causing havoc. And then once you get some film on them and you start looking at them, you go, okay, this is what they're doing. This is what happens when Joseph goes here. And so this is how we exploit it. And what's the response, right? So what is the response from the defense when you do that? So there were a couple of blitzes that Joseph had where he got stoned that were very similar to the blitz up the middle where he got the sack on Fromm last week. And that got stoned a couple of times against Missouri, got stoned a couple of times against Georgia. And I suspect that the youth on defense, especially on the back end, is limiting what he can do. And if you don't have any if you don't have any inventiveness on defense or inventiveness on offense, once people get it on film, they're going to be able to figure out a way to exploit it, especially with a guy like Locke, who's got experience. So that's the other thing, is we have played probably the two best quarterbacks in the SEC last 2 weeks. And you need to take that into account. I would expect the defense to play a lot better next week because Jake Bentley is not Drew Lock and is not Jake Fromm, but he's also not terrible. And so I don't think they're going to get miles and miles better, but I do think they'll be better just by a function of it being not one of the two best quarterbacks in the league. And I think that's also part of what we saw, is that, you put really good quarterbacks out there against the secondary that doesn't have a whole lot of ways to disguise what it's doing, and you're going to be able to exploit that.
All right, Will, you also had another part, and we're definitely going to hit this, that all is not lost, of course. The team 6-3 right now. A lot of people would have taken that right at this point in the season, about where I thought they would be. I said they were going to lose to probably one of Mississippi State or LSU, but they ended up losing to Kentucky. I thought they would lose to Georgia. This is before the season. I know I picked a different. I reset my expectations as the season was going on, but kind of going to where we were at as expectations preseason, and then the Georgia game had them at 2 losses, and I picked them to lose, one of Missouri or South Carolina, and then the FSU game. Well, I couldn't even fathom losing to LSU or FSU right now. So, a 9-3 finish is still very possible for this team. They are going to be favored in every other game from here on out, and have a good chance of beating South Carolina, definitely Idaho and Florida State. It's kind of, there's still something to play for, given where you come from last season and that 4-7 and that 4-7 record. So, we also said going into the season, there's going to be some ups and there's going to be some downs. We've seen some ups and we've seen some downs so far this season. But I think the one thing that gets me is the magical P word, where was progress for this season. We were getting it, and then the last couple of weeks it's just kind of stalled.
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with that a little bit, because whether if Franks had played fantastic and Florida had lost because the defense was getting gashed, or Franks had played average and Florida loses because the defense is getting gashed, I don't know that you have a definitive answer as to whether he's the quarterback next year or not. Right. I mean, one of the things you can say is that we probably have determined, I mean, it sounds like most people have come to the conclusion that he's hit his ceiling. And if he's hit his ceiling, then you know what that is, and you know what you need to do to prepare for next year. And that's a lot of what you need to do at this point. The other thing is, before we worry about 9-3, we got to worry about 7-3.
True.
And so that's the other thing. And then I do think that the players got up for that Georgia game, and the place is packed, and they felt it when they went up 14-13 in the second half. I think they felt like it was there, and then Georgia sort of imposed their will and they lose the game. Well, then they come out to the stadium, and we'll probably talk about it later, but the stadium is 3/4 empty, or I'm sorry, 75% full. And, it definitely was not a real live environment there. And they came out and they were a little bit flat. Missouri took it to them. And then Frank starts to struggle, and, it just sort of snowballs from there. I don't think that that's necessary. I don't think that the game against Missouri is representative of who this team is.
Uh-huh.
I do think that the inconsistency of a team that went 4-7 last year is something that we probably should have expected coming into the year. Obviously, I haven't been able to predict at all when it was going to happen, but it has happened, and I think that's something that, again, like you said, before the season, 6-3, we would have said, yeah, that's. I mean, I would have said that's better than I think. I probably would have had them at 5-4, but at this point, one of those road games, Tennessee or Mississippi State, I'm impressed they were able to get through that, which is why I've picked them the last couple of weeks. But and then the struggles at home, and what exactly that is, I'm not entirely sure. But you think, hey, coming back home, that should be a safe place. That should be where you dominate. That should be where you can be off your game and still manage to win. And that just hasn't proven to be the case. So the nice part is South Carolina doesn't have an explosive offense. Florida State definitely doesn't have an explosive offense. And Idaho, there should be a significant talent advantage that gives them an opportunity there to get healthy and really have some confidence grow out of that one. So I mean, Urban Meyer went 9-3 in his first season with Florida when he came in. There were warts. There were learning experiences. There were times that Leak didn't do what he was supposed to do. I remember watching them run read options with Leak, wondering when are they going to stop doing that? Like, he runs for 2 yards and tries to slide while getting pulled down from behind. It's just not going to work. And I think that's a lot of what the coaches are going to be doing over the next 3 weeks, is really figuring out, okay, who are the guys who are going to ride with us? Who are the guys who are going to bail? And who are the guys that, we can identify as the leaders for next year's team and really sort of take things forward. And also, finish out this season in a way where it helps recruiting, where it helps sell the vision of the program. We're at a place where one of the other things I think that's disappointing about the last couple of losses is at 6-1, you're sitting there going, okay, well, Florida State is a dumpster fire. Miami's really struggling. This is an opportunity to really take advantage of this and do something special where, historical trends for recruiting have been that you don't see these giant classes just all of a sudden coalesce right at the end if you haven't had that kind of talent, sort of coming into the season. But with all the struggles in the state of Florida, all of a sudden you could see sort of a storm that would allow that maybe to happen. And that just hasn't been the case now that they've lost these last 2 games. So, we'll see where we end up on that ledger. But, certainly not all is lost. I think this is a good but not elite team. I think it's a team that needs to show up completely and focused and play well to win. And when they have both sides of the ball playing really fairly poorly, they're just not going to have a shot. And that's what we saw against Missouri.
Yeah, this is a team that's good enough to play with most anybody out there. Definitely not Alabama, Clemson, those type of teams, but most anybody out there. We saw the LSU game, but also the way we know this team has been built, they also can lose to anybody because of the quarterback position front and center, but also the other positions out there that has not been recruited that we know Florida can be recruited at. So yeah, every game from here on out definitely winnable, but also besides Idaho, losable as well. Will, quickly, you brought up next year a couple of times. And it's been reported that Kelly Bryant says there is interest from Florida in his services. And I know, we haven't really discussed it behind the scenes or really broken down his game, but we know enough about him. I think. You think it'd be a good call or not to kind of kick the tires on what Kelly Bryant could do to transfer from Clemson? I'm kind of lost on it. I don't have an opinion really right now either way. Probably because I kind of believe, Emory Jones was a recruited quarterback Dan Mullen wanted, went and got. I think he could probably play next year, given the circumstances, and then Jalen Jones coming in as well. So, I don't think necessarily bringing in a grad transfer, it hurts Emory Jones more than it would recruit like Jalen Jones. But I'm still, would he make the quarterback position better? Probably. I just don't know how much Dan Mullen really wants to, mold and play with Emory Jones. Emory Jones is the main cog into this, I think, unless you really find something in Kyle Trask and roll with him right now. But I think it's the progression of Emory Jones. I think is a key cog in bringing in somebody like Kelly Bryant.
Yeah, I haven't had an opportunity to go and look at his film, which I think is really is really where you need to go. I have looked at his stats last season. I wasn't overly impressed with the actual statistical profile. Now, obviously, he led Clemson to the playoff, but once he got to the playoff, some of his warts were really exposed. And I think even during the season, some of his warts were exposed. I mean, there's a reason why they went with Trevor Lawrence. It's because they think Lawrence has the ability to give him a national championship this year and gives him an opportunity to compete with Alabama. And if that's the case, if you think Emory Jones has the ability to approach what Trevor Lawrence can do, or even 90% of what Trevor Lawrence can do, chances are Kelly Bryant is not going to be able to get you there. It's it's interesting. I didn't have any problem with them potentially going after Burrow last year just because of the timing of things.
Mm-hmm.
You bring in Burrow, you get him for 2 years, you get the competition in the room. If Emory Jones beats out Burrow in Burrow's senior year, hey, no problem. You bring in Bryant, he's playing, right?
Yep.
Unless it's McElwain, because he brought in a grad transfer that didn't play him. But you assume.
Hey, we called that one there.
Well, because it was a poor fit, and his statistical profile said that it didn't make a whole lot of sense. I think the concern with bringing in Brian is you've only got 1 year. Yeah. That 1 year really sort of stunts the growth of people. I think we've seen that you need to bring in a quarterback in every recruiting cycle, and you wonder whether if they start bringing in grad transfers, does that reduce that sort of thing? And then is he really a difference maker at the position, or is he a placeholder because you don't have anything better? And if he's a placeholder because you don't have anything better, that's fine. But you're looking at another, you're looking at 9-3, 10-2. You're not looking at being the SEC's champion, because if Fromm comes back, and well, I guess Fromm will come back. So you got Fromm back. George is getting stronger. Does he make you, is his? I think it's a low variance thing, right? Your floor will be awfully high with somebody with that kind of experience, but does your ceiling really get that much higher? For the most part, if you're building a program, I kind of feel like you would want to go with the high ceiling guy, and that's Emory Jones, that's Jalen Jones, or that's some other recruit that he can flip before the season ends. So I'm sure I'll take a closer look at that at some point going forward, look at the film, see what he's doing, make sure that the eye test sort of matches the statistical profile. But I'm lukewarm on it at best right now. That may change when I take a look, but that's sort of my initial inclination.
All right. Well, before we wrap up here, you also wrote about the good time you had in Gainesville, and we talked about that briefly at the beginning of the episode, and the fun we had tailgating and all that, and then get inside the stadium, and the alumni side pretty much full, but the higher up seats and the student side either took some time to get filled up, or didn't get filled up at all, and the seats were sprinkled there. And some comments made by Dan Mullen that we need to fill the swamp, and the players feed off of that, and you're not winning championships until the swamp is full. That really got a lot of people riled up, and Mullen said similar things like that on his spring tour earlier in the spring, and it sounds good, and I was there kind of behind that message is there when he was here in Jacksonville for, I think it was the first spring event that he had. It would sound good. It sounds like, the fans need to be in there for us to win. But a lot of fans kind of took it the wrong way after you get beat by Missouri, and that message is still being spit out there that this team is not going to win a championship unless all the fans are in the stadium roaring and filling the swamp. And look, I get it. You go back and look at that LSU game, and the crowd did have an effect on the game. But in today's climate, and not just football climate, just society in general, a lot of teams are having trouble selling out the stadiums right now. And it's the big rivalry games and the big time games where every seat's full, but it takes a lot now to get a stadium full. It takes a lot now to get students into a football game that they actually care to watch, and not on the phone the whole time or anything like that. So there are a lot of factors going in here to why the Swamp is not full. The way the team has played the last decade, and as I said, just the climate in general of cell phone technology and TV technology at home. There are a lot of things to point to of why the Swamp is not full. And I think Dan Mullen's comments, they didn't rub much people the wrong way months ago. But after Saturday night, after losing to Missouri, kind of ramped back up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, they rubbed me the wrong way when he did when he made them over the offseason because I wrote something that specifically looked at it wasn't necessarily Mullen. It was the idea that Florida's fans haven't necessarily been supporting the program, and I think that's a little bit of a misguided thing. So if you look at it, Florida made $13.3 million in revenue in 2005 and averaged 90,406 in attendance. They made $24.5 million in ticket revenue in 2017, and they sold a little bit less than 4,000 less seats per year, right? So, or per game. So there's only one way to do that. The only way you average less people in attendance but more money is you raise prices. And I think they're getting to a point now where they've raised prices to a point where people have said, I'm going to stay home. The other thing that they've done is that they've restricted supply. So in 99 to 2004, when I was there, you could buy season tickets as a student. You needed a student ID to pick it up. But then once you got that ticket, you could transfer it to anyone, which meant that you didn't have the pool of 45 or 50,000 students in the university that you could give it to. You could sell it to anybody that you wanted. You could sell it to an alumni. Now, one of the problems with that, and the reason that they, I'm sure that the company line is that they want to have students attending the game when they get a student ticket. But the reason they want to do that is because they're artificially subsidizing those tickets and lowering the overall price, right? And if an alumni can buy a ticket for $20 off a student instead of having to buy something at face value at, whatever, 65 or 70 or whatever the face value is of the ticket, then they make less money. So part of the reason why they're having trouble, and students, what they would do, because this is what I did, is you would buy a set of season tickets and then you would sell those tickets to people who wanted to go to recoup your money. And then you would go to the big games, right? I mean, that was sort of the way you did it. And at this point, the people the students who are buying those tickets are going to the big games and they're not going to the non-marquee games. And this year, there just haven't been a lot of marquee games. Charleston Southern, Kentucky, Colorado State, and Missouri are the 4 games outside of LSU. They had 90,283 for LSU, which is right around where the average was under the Urban Meyer era when they were winning national championships. And other than that, they're drawing about 80,000, and that's just sort of the way it is. So I think it's the university could do things that would increase the attendance on that side of the field if they're upset with it. But they're not necessarily upset with it because they're making money on the alumni side. You said the alumni side was full. Mm-hmm. And so they made more money having the alumni side full than they would have opening up those tickets on the student side to potential alumni and driving down the overall ticket prices, for people who bought them at full price. So, that's a choice they get to make. It's not that I'm saying it's the wrong choice. I'm just saying that economics play a role. And when you restrict demand, then supply goes up, and that's sort of the fallacy in Mullen's argument is that he's basically saying, he's making an argument that's not really based in economics. That hey, fans show up and then we'll win. Well, that's not how it works anywhere. In fact, if you look, I've started to look back at different teams. If you look at Florida State in 2013, they won the national championship and brought in 75,400 fans a game. In 2014, they brought in 82,211. There's a bump after you win the national championship or after you're good. And in fact, I mean, they had teams that were ranked 17th, 23rd, 10th, and they were just sort of in that 75 to 77,000 range. It wasn't until they won the national championship that it went up to 82. So it's not just the University of Florida where fans want to see a winner. It's everywhere. But
to that point, I did find it kind of weird. The team, for the most part, even before this Missouri game, exceeding expectations. Just a week before, you were ranked in the top 10. You were at the center of the college football world. Some of these tickets really should have been sold well before, game week. Yeah, I was surprised at how many empty seats there were.
Now, see, you'll see that next year. Like if there's excitement around the program, if Mullen can finish out 9-3, if he can beat Florida State, if he can win a bowl game, you'll see that bump next year. What you're seeing is the lag. I think what you're seeing is the lag from the performance in 2017, where fans just don't necessarily trust it's going to be an experience. Missouri isn't necessarily a marquee game. I mean, I traveled quite a long way to to watch that debacle, and I had a good time because I was hanging out with family and doing all sorts of stuff like that. But if you're
But for the students, that LSU game should have been a blast.
Well, yeah,
And,
and 90,200 people showed up for that thing.
right,
So
so it doesn't bleed over into the next game.
no, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think, and look, I don't have detailed statistical numbers on the attendance for this year. I have not gone and looked at other teams, but I mean, I know Nick Saban was complaining about people in the stands earlier this year. And so on that side, they're like, well, we win too much. We don't have to show up, complaining about the students. I think what you're running into is that when you have a limited pool of people who can go, because you're not allowing those student tickets to transfer out into the open market, you're going to have empty seats, because I don't want to go see Alabama play East Tennessee State and be up 48-0 after the first quarter. Yeah. And I don't, and if I'm coming to watch Florida play Charleston Southern, they were up big, and okay, so I traveled all the way down there, and now I'm, staying for a second half of seeing backups. Or if it's close, then I'm ticked off because it's close if I'm a fan. So, none of this absolves students for not going. I mean, you need to support the team. Obviously, I mean, I was there this weekend. I had a great time. But I do think that there are economic arguments for this. I mean, I think when you look at all the major professional sports, this is what happens: is there's a bump in attendance after teams show success. I think the same thing happens for Florida. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was, in 2006 they win the national title. 2006 and 2007 they win the basketball title. 2008 they win the football title, and attendance just skyrocketed. People wanted to come to the University of Florida. Again, after the championship, students wanted to come for that reason. And so, it raises the profile of the university and that sort of stuff. It's just, again, I haven't gone back and looked in detail. It's something I might actually do. Go back and look. Okay, well, where was Alabama in Saban's first year? Okay, then they lose in the SEC championship game. What's their attendance look like? Okay, then they win the national championship. What does their attendance look like the next year? And Alabama's probably a little bit of an outlier because just they've won so consistently for so long, but you can go back and look at Clemson's numbers and look at it too. I suspect that what we're going to see is that there's a bump in attendance after you win consistently. And, there's a certain segment of the fan base that's fickle. There's a certain segment of the fan base that wants to invest, that wants to invest money in a winner. Whether that's right or whether that's wrong is something that people can make up their mind. But Mullen's statement that the fans show up, then you win a championship, I don't think holds economic muster, and I'll probably try to prove it at some point.
Yeah, I know a lot of students have reached out to us that the student population is much different than it used to be as well, with admission standards and all that stuff about how those fans who love football can't get into Florida as much like they used to. So,
well, I mean, my brother lives 3 or 4 hours away. If he could get tickets for, Florida A&M for, $15 a pop and take his stepson, I'm sure he would.
Yeah.
Right. But he's not going to do it for 50. Yeah. Right. He doesn't it's not worth it to him to go get completely sunburned and baked on a September afternoon. Does that make him a fickle fan? I don't think so. I think it makes him, somebody who values his money and is willing to be a discerning consumer. And that's really what this boils down to. You can't have a program that brings in, $125 million a year and say, oh, it's not a business. It's an entertainment business, and you have to treat it like that. And when you continually raise prices, eventually you get to a point where some segment of the population either doesn't want to or can't pay for it. And so, it was not inexpensive for our family. We had 8 people go to the game. It was not inexpensive for us to go. And, we're thankfully able to do that. And thankfully we think it's worth it. And I definitely think it's worth it, but not everybody agrees with me. And so, you're going to price people out at some point.
Yeah, well, hopefully that's enough off-field football stuff.
Well, that's why we save it till the end.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you stick around this long, that's where you'll get the off-field stuff.
I'm sure people will be mad at me. I'd love to hear your comments.
Yeah. Will, anything else? I know kind of a crazy week for you coming back from Gainesville on Sunday and all that. South Carolina preview later this week.
Yeah, there will be a South Carolina preview out. You probably want to bet against me if recent history is any indication. I've had people begging me to pick the Gamecocks, so we'll see, including my brother. So we'll see how that goes. But no, I mean, I think I am encouraged to see where the program goes from here. I think one of the discouraging things about the Missouri game is it did feel like this was the first time that I thought that Mullen, didn't show that he was a superior coach. I don't want to say he got out coached, but he didn't show that he was a superior coach. We already talked about Toney not being on the field. He sort of had the 3 runs to end the half down 21-10 when they had 50 seconds left. It just felt kind of like, okay, we're giving up. They had 2 15-yard penalties on the punter. Not exactly the special teams performance that we've seen earlier in the year.
Funniest things I've seen is Townsend just head first, boom.
Oh man! I mean, I couldn't believe he didn't get ejected, but must have got him in the torso or something. So I mean, all the things that we've looked at throughout the year. Hey, we're going to have an efficient passing game. It's going to be, it's going to be built around the strengths of the quarterback, and we're not going to ask him to do things he can't do. Okay, well that didn't happen. Hey, we're going to have a defense that's going to really put pressure and generate turnovers, and we'll give up some big plays, but we're going to make some too. All right, that didn't happen either. And then hey, special teams is going to be the strength of the team. We're not going to beat ourselves on special teams. They had 3 personal foul penalties. I mean, there was that one drive, I think it was the last touchdown Missouri scored, where they had 30 yards worth of personal fouls. The ball should have been at the 20. Instead, it's across midfield to start. One play later, Missouri's down inside the 10, and then that touchdown, the game's over. So, it was sort of a perfect storm of everything going wrong. But it is the one time that I thought Mullen, the team looked out of control. We sort of looked at it. And so, that's going to be his challenge this week against South Carolina. And I'm interested to see how he's able to bounce back as well. Because, we talk about Franks back and bouncing back. We talk about the defense bouncing back. I think in this case, it's an opportunity for Mullen to bounce back. And I'm really excited to see how he does.
Absolutely. I'll have Will Gunter on later this week to preview South Carolina. I get a good South Carolina preview there for the game. I think the Gators must win here, and get stacked up there for a better bowl game when it's all said and done. And get some positive mojo, positive momentum going into the FSU game in a couple of weeks. Will, anything else?
Nah, man, just thanks everybody for the hospitality down in Gainesville. I really enjoyed myself, and can't wait to get back there next year.
Thunder, Will. Thunder.
Best part of the day. Best part of the day, Dave.
Absolutely. So that's Will Miles. You can find him on Twitter at Will Miles SEC and his site readandreaction.com. I'm your host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.